Well, greetings and welcome, all you brave people. This is, what's that? We're very lucky to have this talk today about a topic that's beyond most of our understandings, and I among them. I love science, and I love New Yorker cartoons. And there was a New Yorker cartoon a couple years ago that's relevant. There was a gentleman sitting in the waiting room of a veterinarian's office. And he was sitting there waiting anxiously. Next to his box, he brought his cat in to be examined. And as he's sitting there, the veterinarian comes out to him and says, "Dr. Schrodinger, I have some good news and some bad news." For those of you for whom that makes no sense whatsoever, I think you may understand it better at the end of this talk. We're very lucky today to hear from Ruth Kastner. Kastner, somehow that has a familiar ring to it. Who's both a physicist and a philosopher of science and has delved deeply into quantum mechanics and written about it. And she has offered to talk about it in a way that we may understand and know much more at the end of this lecture than we do right now. So, Ruth.
All right, so in principle, you should be able to hear me. Okay, are we on now? Okay, so let me know if you can't hear me at any point. You know, just still getting comfortable with the TED Talk technology here. It's always fun. Okay, so there's our little kitty cat. You know, I guess as a preamble, I should maybe let you know kind of the evolution in my own thinking as I've come to the point of, you know, studying what I'm studying about physics and quantum theory. I actually started out as a very stodgy kind of physics explains everything. Let's not get all woo and let's be, you know, logical and so on. And when I got to the point of quantum theory, I began to, you know, my own mind was being messed with by it. And I initially approached a way of interpreting quantum theory that for me seemed to make a little more sense than the other ways of interpreting the theory. And this approach is called the transactional interpretation. So I usually talk about the transactional interpretation of quantum mechanics because that's what I've been working on. But more recently, I've started to become more aware of ways in which we really need to question our whole approach to doing science. So there's kind of a broader issue here. And my talk, you know, I maybe have a little too many slides and so on, but I'm going to try to just kind of go through some of these issues, starting with kind of a review, I guess, of the Schrodinger cat paradox, okay? Because our cat is reminding us here that's kind of a place where, you know, a lot of people have heard about the Schrodinger cat paradox. And it means different things to different people. Now, what it meant to Schrodinger, this is the important thing. To Schrodinger, it was a protest. It was an argument that there's something wrong with quantum theory. And that's what people nowadays have lost. And it didn't get communicated down through the formal kind of educational channels. So let me just, before I get into, you know, the ramifications of all that, let's just review. What is this Schrodinger cat paradox? Well, perhaps Schrodinger didn't like cats. I don't know. But, you know, what we always have, we treat this issue as if, well, the cat is in a quantum superposition of alive and dead. Well, just because I'm a cat lover, I'm going to just slightly adapt it to the cat is in a superposition of awake and asleep, because the relevant stuff that it's been exposed to is just a sleeping potion. All right, so that way we can all be less upset about the dead cat. So the basic idea is Schrodinger said, okay, this is what quantum theory, as it currently is formulated, is telling us, guys. And he was talking to his fellow physicists. He was saying, the problem with this theory is all it can do is say that things get correlated. Okay, so what it does is it takes, he says, some quantum system. Let's take a radioactive atom. Okay, so when you have a radioactive atom, it can be represented in quantum theory as being in a superposition of having sent off a particle or having not yet sent off what's called a decay particle. So you have to kind of have it in a superposition. And at the quantum level, where you can't really see these things, it seems like, oh, it's okay. Okay, well, I have this quantum system. It's in a quantum state. It's and you can talk about quantum states in this abstract way, and it works out, and you get good predictions from the theory in terms of the probabilities. But what he said was, but you cannot tell me how you measured anything. When we measure things, we get a result. We don't get a superposition, right? We go in the laboratory, we look at our detector, and has that detector fired or not at time t? There's always a yes or no. It's either fired or it has not fired. We never see quantum superpositions, right? None of us is in a quantum superposition right now that we can see. We've got very clearly defined objects. So what Schrodinger did is he amplified this idea of a quantum superposition that it never actually gets collapsed, never actually gets into an outcome, a clearly defined outcome. And he said, okay, fine. I want to take this atom. Now we use Geiger counters to measure a decay particle. Something comes in, it's a little detector. Again, when we use these Geiger counters, they either detect something or they don't. They're never in superpositions. But he said, what your theory says is I have to take this Geiger counter, and then sometimes it's kind of called a pointer, meaning that it's something that's involved in making a measurement. It's something that's supposed to help us see what's going on. But the theory will only tell you that you have to assign states to your Geiger counter that correlate with the state of the atom. So you have to have a triggered state of your Geiger counter that goes along with the decayed atom. And then you have to have an untriggered state for your Geiger counter that goes along with your undecayed atom. So you have your atom in a superposition, then you've got your Geiger counter being expressed as part of this superposition. And what I think it's helpful to think of it as the atom, the initial quantum state, kind of being like a train engine, except it's a superposition of train engines, right? So we've got a train engine for atom has decayed, sent off its decay particle. You can't hear? Oh, sorry. Okay, let's do that. All right. Okay. Okay, good. So you've got a superposition. Once you bring your Geiger counter in, it gets kind of assimilated into a superposition because you've got a state of the Geiger counter that has to be correlated with whatever train engine you're talking about. So you've got a little train engine for decayed atom, triggered Geiger counter. You've got another train engine for undecayed atom, untriggered Geiger counter. Now Schrodinger goes, okay, this isn't good, folks. I want you to face up to the fact that your theory does not let you say that you ever got a measurement outcome. So we'll get things even bigger. We'll say, I'm going to bring in a cat in here eventually because I don't like cats, right? But anyway, so something about the cat thing. I don't know. We'll psychoanalyze him later. But so he says, okay, I'm going to connect a cat up to this, some kind of, macroscopic thing. All right. So he said, oh, okay, well, we'll do the sleeping potion. We've got a little vial of sleeping potion. So when this atom decays, it triggers a hammer to smash this glass this vial full of poison gas. And so now we have to have a state for the the vial of sleeping potion. So this vial of sleeping potion, according to quantum theory, is now either smashed and the potion's getting out, or for the other train engine where the atom has not decayed, it is still intact and the cat is still awake, right? So then we bring the cat in. Once again, quantum theory says you can only have correlations. You have to have the appropriate state to enter into this correlation. So on the one hand, we have another little train car, which is the cat is asleep for the train that corresponds to the decayed atom, and the cat is awake on the other train. And we still have this gigantic superposition. So this is the Schrödinger cat paradox. And the reason it's a paradox is because the theory seems to be saying something very bizarre about the objects in our world that, in fact, we don't see, right? So the issue that's kind of a little bit pathological, if you will, lately I've been getting a bit cantankerous about the state of physics and quantum theory. The problem is that instead of remembering that Schrödinger set this up as a criticism of the theory to highlight the fact that the theory fails to tell you that you ever got a measurement outcome when you think you're doing measurements, because the theory will only let you make these trains, these superposed trains. It will never let you say that you got an outcome. So, and there's a famous quote from Schrödinger. Let me try to get this out farther here. What? Yeah, my microphone is actually in a determinate state of not where it needs to be. So that's the classical world we're in. I may end up switching to the hand mic, but we'll go with this. So, and Schrödinger at the time said, this is a direct quote from Schrödinger, he said, "I don't like it, and I'm sorry I ever had anything to do with it." Quantum theory. So you should feel reassured. So the point is, this is what got me into the transactional picture, because I argue that it cures that problem. That what it does is and I explain this in my books, which, if this talk kind of leaves you feeling frustrated or confused, I do have a number of books, and there is a book I've written for the layperson that really goes into some conceptual detail with diagrams about how this transactional formulation is a way of approaching the way fields behave in quantum theory that's different from the conventional way, and it actually lets you describe what a measurement is. So you can answer Schrödinger's concern. Unfortunately, he's definitely dead now, but so we can't tell him. But there is a way to address this concern of Schrödinger's. Now, the dysfunctional thing, though, is that now, you'll often hear people say, at least I have, well, we went into the lab and we created some Schrödinger cat states. And, they think it's something cool, like it's, oh yeah, we're going to make Schrödinger. No, you've missed the point. You can make fairly large superpositions of what we would call mesoscopic objects like molecules, and that's kind of cool. But they've missed the point largely of the Schrödinger cat paradox. It's what's called a reductio ad absurdum, for those of you who do math. It's a proof that Schrödinger offered that the theory has a problem, and it does. So when you hear people saying, well, quantum theory is fine, there's nothing wrong with it. No, actually, in the conventional way of formulating the theory, it does have this is called the measurement problem. Literally, the conventional way of approaching the theory fails to tell you what you did when you did a measurement and you got an outcome. It literally fails to do that. So after that long preamble, let's start looking a little bit at some of the the issues that I've come to kind of appreciate in this exploration is that it ties into that the dysfunctionality of the standard way of approaching quantum theory that leaves us with this Schrödinger's cat paradox is actually kind of based on ways of thinking that Ian McGilchrist, author and neuroscientist, has kind of started to make it interesting, not beyond started, has been arguing that our usual way of looking at the world is primarily a left brain approach, and that there's actually a right brain approach that is actually more consistent with what quantum theory is all about, and would help us, if we were using our right brain, would help us to get a wider perspective on the options for making sense of quantum theory. So in short, that's kind of what my talk is mostly about today. And just to kind of review that, we've got our left brain and our right brain here. And as McGilchrist has pointed out, our left brain is primarily kind of mechanistic oriented. It's fact oriented. It expects to always have a yes or no answer. It expects things to be very localized and kind of, it's this mechanistic picture that there's always a yes or a no, and that nothing can ever be uncertain, and so on. Now, on the other hand, the right brain has this more holistic quality. You may have heard that quantum theory does kind of instruct us that reality has more of a connected kind of holistic character than it appears to us in everyday life. And that is very much the case. So the right brain is in general kind of more comfortable with that notion. It doesn't do the analytic kind of thinking. It doesn't separate things. It sees more of a big picture. It also operates on a more intuitive level. And it's also comfortable with uncertainty, with having no particular, yes or no answer to things. So as McGilchrist has argued that in fact the right brain should really be the one in charge, and he wrote a book called The Master and Its Emissary. And he argued that the right brain needs to kind of be in charge, and that the left brain is more of an emissary, kind of a workman-like feature of the brain that needs to be kind of supervised and shouldn't just be left to go off on its own, kind of like the Sorcerer's Apprentice. And if you remember Mickey Mouse with the broom and so on. So that's kind of what the left brain is doing in a sense in our world, according to McGilchrist, and I think he's got a point. So what I'm going to just suggest is that the left brain is kind of the classically oriented brain. It's nuts and bolts, how do I get from here to there, and so on, and assessing the environment. And you need to do that. We obviously need to do that to stay alive, and so on, and continue functioning. But in fact, the quantum level is really what's underlying all that in a very interesting and very potent way. And that McGilchrist would basically argue that needs to be in charge. And similarly, so the parallel here is that the quantum level is more fundamental than our sort of classical level of appearance. Now, we still obviously have to be responsible to our classical level of appearance, and that's part of the measurement problem, where the current quantum theory doesn't make that leap. It doesn't tell you, well, how do I get out of this quantum level into our level of experience, which a good theory should do. So here's where I just kind of review those quantum perplexities, and again, the Schrodinger's cat paradox. And then there's also Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which basically tells you that for a quantum system, something like an atom or an electron, you can't really say, okay, where is this atom right now? Exactly where is it, and exactly how fast is it going? Now, in the classical world, those are reasonable questions, and you can answer both of them to a good approximation. But Heisenberg pointed out that you cannot ask that question for something like an atom. If there is a well-defined position for the atom, it does not have any well-defined momentum speed, okay? So, and it's not just that we don't know it, or we can't find it. It doesn't exist. Literally, that atom is anywhere. okay? So on the other hand, if you know exactly what an atom's momentum is, it is not in a well-defined position. And again, this isn't a matter of our ignorance. It's about the atom itself. So this kind of uncertainty, again, the right brain is okay with that. The right brain is like, yeah, whatever, it's all good. The left brain is freaking out, right? Okay, so that's why we tend to freak out, because our left brain is a very, very good, efficient manager of the classical manifest, what I call manifest localized. It's very good at that. And it's also a bit of a control freak, so that's the thing, is that the larger thesis of my talk is we've got to get this left brain guy kind of down a few notches and let it chill out. Okay. And a lot of physicists are still, excuse me, my throat is a little messed up. Now you will find a lot of the work being done in physics and in quantum theory right now is an expression of left brain saying, oh, no, you don't. This uncertainty principle, okay, well, it's formally correct, but I'm going to interpret quantum theory such that nothing's really uncertain. And that's the left brain kind of freaking out and putting things into the theory that aren't really there, called hidden variables. So like that, well, it's really got a position, I just don't happen to know what it is. So there's a lot of dysfunctionality. This is my take on it. And I make physicists mad when I say things like this. But, it's what I'm doing is I'm being critical of the resistance to certain features of quantum theory that the theory is very good, except for the measurement problem, it's very good. And I think we should be listening to the theory rather than trying to tinker with it so that our left brain is more comfortable with it. Okay, so then the other feature that is troubling to the left brain is entanglement and non-locality. And in short, this is the phenomenon where you can have quantum states of more than one particle, so that there are two electrons, and they are in a particular kind of correlated state, such that if you send them off to opposite ends of the galaxy, and someone on one end measures some property of this electron, and then someone on the other end of the galaxy measures a particular property, there will be correlations between their outcomes that cannot be explained by any kind of light signal. So it's as if they're tied together in some way this is called non-locality. It seems to violate relativity, the relativistic restrictions on influences being sent, at a certain speed. It doesn't really, but it just has that character. And again, this is the right brain is like, yes, so what's your problem? And the left brain is freaking out. So this is kind of the common theme. The overall theme, if you don't get anything else out of this talk, is that number one here, I'm arguing, is actually a problem with the theory that Schrodinger was right. It needs to be able to tell you what counts as a measurement, what kind of process am I engaging in when I get a measurement outcome, and why did I get that outcome? And that there is a way to address that. The other two features, 2 and 2, look at that, I've got 2 and 3. It's the right brain's fine with that too, right? Anyway, 2 and 3. Those are really features of the structure of the mathematical structure of the quantum world, if you will. That it's something that really has these properties of non-locality. So we can become more comfortable with that. And so one way to look at this is to kind of expand our notion of reality, even our notion of what's physical reality. And so what I've been kind of suggesting here is that reality is like this big iceberg, rough, it's a metaphor. So what we're used to is this tip of the iceberg. That's our manifest world of appearance that pretty much makes sense, certain things don't make sense, I guess. But as far as, where an object is and so on, this is what I call the tip of the iceberg. Allergies kicking in. And then this hidden portion, which is very much real and very consequential, corresponds to the quantum level. So it's it's definitely there, but it's not what I call manifest. It's hidden from us in some sense. And then we need to figure out what is it that we're doing to kind of get observable results out of this hidden portion of the iceberg. And just to go back here again, so the left brain mode of thinking is dealing with the tip of the iceberg only. And it's comfortable with that, it's good with that. Meanwhile, the right brain is aware of this entire hidden structure in some sense, and it's okay with that. Now, I mean, the right brain, if you there's a story, I don't know if any of you have seen this wonderful TED Talk by Jill Bolte Taylor, who is a neuroscientist who ended up having a stroke that took out her left brain functionality. And so her left brain was offline, and only her right brain was in control, was operating. And clearly she was incapacitated and needed help. And eventually she did recover, but she gives a wonderful account of her experience with the right brain only. And it was this completely holistic, expanded awareness. So that is kind of what the right brain has. That's the capacity of the right brain. And so that's why I think it kind of makes a nice parallel, that the right brain understands the quantum level in a way that the left brain just can't. Okay, so what I say here, the quantum level is pre-empirical, and that means stuff is going on behind the scenes, so it's not directly available to the senses. And it's, as I said, it's more comfortable with these weird features of quantum mechanics. Okay, let's see. There we go. Okay, and basically this is what we just said. And so the argument here that I offer is that one way to get more comfortable with at least certain aspects of quantum theory is to acknowledge that the right brain has a role to play, that the left brain modes of thinking are very useful tools, but sometimes it's kind of like when you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so sometimes the left brain ways of thinking are imposing a little bit too much of that tool onto reality. And now Carl Jung just had some really interesting things to say that I like to share. He said these things before quantum theory, or at least before he knew about it. He said the multiplicity of the empirical world, that's our classical tip of the iceberg world, rests on an underlying unity. Everything divided and different belongs to one and the same world, which is not the world of sense. And then some Jung scholars amplified this a little bit, and they said, if we want to characterize Carl Jung's psychology in one sentence, we can say that it leads us to the view that there is a part of the world that we can't see, a realm of reality that doesn't consist of material things but of non-material forms. So this goes to the sort of the hidden aspect of what quantum theory is describing. So I tend to quibble a bit about whether something is material or non-material, but so that may not be the right word, but it points to, again, this idea that the quantum level is hidden from us. It seems more abstracted and maybe even more mind-like than the phenomenal concrete level that we are shown by our external senses. So that's kind of a nice way of seeing that other thinkers have kind of noticed these features of reality, and then quantum theory seems to be supporting those observations. We could make a little kind of duality here, a little division here, again with this manifest part of our world that is well described by classical physics. It's what I call actualized. It's well defined and available to our senses. It's got this particle-like mechanical behavior. It looks fragmented. It looks like things are a bunch of different things. and it wants facts. It provides facts, and it seeks to provide clearly defined facts. And it's actually the realm of what I argue. It's the realm of space-time, what we call space-time, meaning, we think we all live in a space-time container in a sense, and we don't really. But on the other hand, there's this unmanifest aspect to reality, and that is what's described by the quantum level, the quantum theory, to some extent when it's working right. It's got this aspect of potentiality rather than actual. It's not concrete. It's got a wave-like, even organic quality to it. It's got these non-local correlations. It's holistic. We've got these entangled situations where what we think of as separate particles are somehow not really separate, even though they are maybe can be detected in very different places. It's got more of a becoming kind of a process-oriented nature to it. It's not well defined as opposed to what it is at any particular time. And I argue that it's actually going on at a pre-space-time level. So this is maybe the most radical of the ideas that I'm proposing. I'm not the only one actually saying this these days, but that in fact it suggests that we should not think of space-time as encompassing everything that's physically real. That there are things that exist that are actually not contained in space-time, what we call space-time. So here's where we go to Asian philosophy a little bit to argue that or to try to maybe accentuate the idea that in the Western way of looking at science, we are kind of missing something that Asian philosophers and Asian culture have known about and are more comfortable about with. And to kind of get a handle on this, we go back to Taoism and the Tao Te Ching, which is written by Lao Tzu, an ancient Chinese master. And we have this kind of a duality, but it's a process. It's organic. It's not a static thing, and it's got these two aspects to it. These two complementary aspects that are called yin and yang. So the idea is, let's see our next slide, that these principles of yin and yang have these different, very different qualities. So yang has this initiating, creating, offering, emitting character, okay? And yin has these opposite properties of responding, destroying, accepting, absorbing. It's a receptive principle. So what I'm going to argue is that, in fact, like in a nutshell, if you don't get anything else out of this talk, the transactional formulation of quantum mechanics brings in these features into the field behavior that are missing in the usual way of theorizing about fields in quantum theory, in physics. And that when you view, so what we see is in the Western approach, in traditional physics and quantum theory, the theory is very comfortable with the ideas of emitting. Oh, I've got something, I've got an excited atom. It's going to emit a photon. There it goes, it's all done. Okay, job done. Okay. And that's the way it's thought of. And in fact, this transactional picture says, oh no, the reason you can't tell me why you got a measurement outcome is because that is not the only thing going on. What's also going on is your fields are doing this. You didn't think your fields could kind of sit there and listen, did you? So this is the really strange thing. And there's also, for those of you who know Alfred North Whitehead, his thought was very much attuned to what he called prehension, was this yin-like aspect of the world. So in physics, in conventional physics, this is basically like, what? Are you being stupid? Please go away. That is not considered a legitimate attribute. It's even just sort of just viewed as kind of silliness. What are you telling me, that an atom that something like an electron could be receiving, could be responding. What? Are you crazy? You know, and in fact, there's a way to formalize this in field behavior. And this is actually what Wheeler and Feynman did. John Wheeler and Richard Feynman actually created, or it was already out there, but they worked with and they elaborated a theory of field behavior in which this is literally going on. Okay, and it's called the absorber theory of radiation. So this has been around for a long time, and it works. And if you use it, it helps you explain what you're doing when you're measuring, and that in fact the fields are interacting in this way in which both yang and yin are represented. There's a field being offered, and there's a field being responded with. So when you actually include this in the formalism, you get a clearly defined explanation for why you don't see cats in superpositions and so on. So those are kind of the technical details that you can learn more about in my books and so on. But that's kind of it in a nutshell. That here I'm just kind of reviewing our categories and noting that this manifest level is primarily the domain of yang, right? I mean, when we see phenomena, we generally see them as more yang-like. We see something going from here to there, end of story. You know, you can often see things, you know, in a volleyball game, you can see people hitting things back and so on. But a lot of what goes on is very yang-like. And at the unmanifest quantum level, we are actually getting more of these yin-like kinds of properties. So that's kind of an interesting parallel to take note of. And going back to the right brain versus left brain, once again, the left brain is much more comfortable with yang because it's kind of more, it's more obvious. It's easier to see. It's easier to pick up on. And whereas the right brain is more attuned to yin, it's acting at a subtler level. So the interesting thing is that in the Tao Te Ching, he talks about this duality, but he will actually make comments like know the yang but keep to the yin. And there are a number of other verses in the Tao Te Ching that suggest that in some sense yin is more fundamental. So this again ties in with the parallel where the quantum level is much more fundamental, but it's subtler, it's hidden, and you know, it's not the whole story. You definitely need yang, but somehow in some sense this yin mode can be seen as more fundamental. And that goes along again with the master versus the emissary. So I don't want to go on too long. So I'm going to just kind of start summing up right now that this prevailing, you know, what I argue is that the prevailing left brain way of thinking is putting us in this constraining metaphysical box. So I've basically kind of explained, you know, what's going on with that. Here I'm elaborating on that a bit, but we don't really have time to go through that. But the Cartesian dualism, where we've got pure extended matter versus mind, and these two are completely different things, and one of them's just dead matter. It's assumed to be non-sentient. Well, that's silly. You know, why would you say that this hunk of matter is sentient? You know, so it's assumed that the basic building blocks of the world are dead, effectively speaking. And then people wonder why, you know, where's life? Where does life come from? And that leads to a lot of paradoxes. So here I'm just going to skip through this, where I talk a little bit about materialism and this left brain idea that the world is made of these inherently separate objects, and that we don't see the yin kind of aspects of reality. Okay, and that the way fields are modeled in physics is much like this tennis serve, where we think that that's all that you need to do. And again, this is what it looks like at our everyday level of phenomenal experience. It looks like that's all you need, is for something to emit something, and then your job is done. But it turns out that doesn't work at the quantum level. And again, these are our bucket brigade people. That's the left brain modeling the way energy gets distributed in the standard way of looking at quantum mechanics. So this is what I've basically mentioned here, is with this transactional picture of fields, we are saying no to a lot of these preconceptions, and we're getting a field behavior in a nutshell, where if you have something emitting, an excited atom, and you have something that could absorb what's emitted, they're actually engaging in a mutual process where this emitter is giving off a field here in green. It's actually time symmetric. It's actually, on a subtle level, it's oriented in both temporal directions. And then the absorber is actively doing something. It's responding to that. And together, these fields end up canceling out suitably so that you get a real hunk of energy going from the emitter to the absorber. So in a nutshell, that's the transactional picture. And when you do that, this counts as a measurement. This actually will give you a measurement, and it will collapse these quantum superpositions. So for the whole story about that, you can look at my books, and I can offer other references. So anyway, bottom line, you can do stuff. There's this Buddhist koan that it's this riddle that says, what is this sound of one hand clapping? And that's much like, the measurement problem in quantum theory. Well, okay, no, there's no sound. You're not getting a measurement result. And you have to have two hands. You have to have this mutual process. Then you can clap, you can have a handshake, you can get measurement outcomes. Now, I don't know if you can see this little cartoon I drew a long time ago. Okay, Adventures of Schrodinger's cat. The cat scratches back. He tried to kill me with poison gas and put me in a quantum superposition. Well, he overlooked something. Okay, if that atom decays, it emits a photon. The photon will be absorbed by the Geiger counter. And guess what happens when the photon gets absorbed? Collapse. So we get what's called wave function collapse, but there's a reason for it. Okay, it's because the absorber is active. So he never got me into a quantum superposition, and I'm out of here before one time constant. That's just a term that means how long is it going to take before that thing decays. Schrodinger, at least I can think outside the box. So that's the basic point here is that we need to think outside the box, this Western box of modeling field behavior as one way and unilateral, and that very simply, if we allow for this kind of process that fields can engage in a quantifiable way, that then we get a good just physical account of what's going on when we're measuring, and we never get cats in superpositions. So I have some stuff about possibility here, but I think we'll just kind of leave some time for questions. This can actually give you a picture of the emergence of space-time, but that's kind of another story. Quantum possibilities are more organic in nature. And this is just reviewing the right brain versus left brain, and Jill Bolte Taylor, who was our right brain guinea pig in a sense, who came back and told us a lot about the right brain and how important it is. And this transactional process can be seen as kind of uniting the two levels, the quantum level and the classical level. It what creates the bridge. So we need them both. But we need to have an understanding of the way fields behave in physics that lets us cross over and lets us say, what is it that's making this quantum level be available to us at our classical level of appearance? We need that account. And so I argue that the transactional formulation gives us that account. Okay, we got some conclusions that, I've basically already mentioned here, that we need to have this yin-like process. It needs to be considered a legitimate part of physics. And and again, this is just me kind of saying, hey, what Wheeler and Feynman were doing when they were working with this absorber theory is actually working with a yin-like behavior of fields. They didn't, of course, didn't see it that way, and they considered it a perfectly good theory. But it's still a bit viewed with a bit of skepticism, because I think it has this receiving, responding kind of character that isn't really welcome in the Western physics paradigm. Okay, so these are just some books that offer, the details that I've had to leave out here and kind of glossing over things. So thank you so much for being here and listening. Thank you. Yes.
Where does consciousness fit in? Consciousness.
So the question is, where does consciousness fit in?
Such as
Yeah.
consciousness of precognition, knowing something going to happen in the future, or something that's happening a distance away.
Well, yeah, the nice thing, I mean, obviously in my own work, I don't pretend that I have a specific theory of consciousness. So I don't, but consciousness I do take as something that is fundamental. There's something called the hard problem of consciousness, where if you start by assuming that the real building blocks of matter are dead, non-sentient, then you've got a problem. And there's a lot of hand waving that goes on where people try to say, oh yeah, I can get consciousness out of a bunch of dead stuff. Here's how and that's just, you can't do that. So that's why I think that, to be consistent, you have to say, well, consciousness must be some fundamental aspect of reality that you can consider as being, in the submerged portion of the iceberg, or if you like, in the ocean. It has to be very fundamental. But as to the manifestations of that in people who have had these experiences, it kind of makes perfect sense if you take seriously this idea of the quantum level as being a level of potentiality, which I formalize in my work, so that then if our right brain is attuned to that, our left brain is like, no, oh my God, leave me alone, stop talking, right? The left brain is saying that. If the right brain is aware enough can fend off the left brain's chatter long enough to be able to access that, then it's perfectly consistent that a human being's right brain capabilities could pick up on this level of potentiality. And that's where you can at least have an opening. I'm not going to stand here and say, well, here's how I have a theory of precognition. I don't have a theory. But the consistency is that if you allow that, yes, potentialities in some sense are real, they are quantifiable to some degree by quantum theory, if we understand them as real potentialities. That's what the theory is describing. And it's perfectly consistent to say that the human brain could access those. So that would be not through the five senses. That would be through some more internal process.
I have two questions. The first one is, what the heck difference does it make? So we'll dismiss that question. And the second is, do you see AI having any kind of impact on the development of quantum physics?
Sorry, I'm not seeing who's speaking. Okay. Well, what the heck difference does it make? I mean, like, for a lot of physicists, they had this little acronym SUAC, shut up and calculate. It works, doesn't it? And that's fine if all you're doing is, you're using quantum theory in the lab to make cool stuff or AI or whatever. Fine, but don't pretend that it's consistent. I'm the philosopher is like, I'm just the pesky journalist who's holding the politicians' feet to the fire. In this case, the theory's feet to the fire. That's my job. Don't say things that you can't support. So if someone says, well, the theory works to predict measurement outcomes, like, well, sir, where in your theory did you get, what could you please explain? And so I'm that person doing that. So that's my job. But as for AI, well, good question. The AI thing, I mean, you can use quantum theory for technology, but it's actually hard to do because you get limited by the fact that transactions are going on all the time and they're decohering things. And so you are very much kind of limited to classical-like behavior unless you cool things down to absolute zero, and then you can start to make use of things like quantum coherence and so on, which gives you these apparently non-local features. But it's kind of a pragmatic issue because the cost of getting these special controlled conditions is, can be prohibitive. But just one funny thing about AI, like everything nowadays is called AI. Like when I was a kid and they had the automatic dishwasher came along, I'm old enough to remember about that. And if we had the same attitude now, well, I've got an AI washing thing. It's an AI, and it's just like everything gets called AI. So this is just my little. Now, if you go to a car wash and it's automated, because there's just some little mechanical thing that's automated, say, I'm going to the AI car wash.
I came because I thought you could explain my granddaughter's partners working on a doctorate in quantum computing.
Okay.
And how I could grasp with my pre-1970 education, which was all right brain, how you could get the main mechanism down to below absolute zero. And I was like, what? But I really found in this lecture, I got my whole life integrated because I've been working in the left side area of life. I didn't become a physician. I didn't follow science. And I've been doing work with possibility. So
wonderful.
Thank you. It kind of explains the bridge, and I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of us are working with possibility, and a lot of us are not appreciated for doing that. So I'm fighting back on the, possibilities. Hey.
Teilhard de Chardin, the paleontologist and philosopher, described what he believed could be the human evolution into a new sphere that was, as I understand it, pure spirituality, but where this initiative and responding would occur. What's your sense of that kind of existence, whether it's spiritual or electrons communicating with one another? It seems to me that one implication of your description between the yin and the yang suggests that.
Well, gee, I haven't really thought too much about that, but certainly you can see that spirituality has more of an affinity for the yin-like mode. That it is, somebody can be. Someone who's meditating, the Buddha, or a Buddhist monk, or it's total yin, and this is what goes back to. That one of those verses from the Tao Te Ching, know the yang but keep to the yin. So when someone is meditating, they are literally doing that. They are keeping to the yin. And because it looks, the problem with Western society is that it values only yang. Like, what are you sitting on your butt for? Go out and do something. Make some money. I want to see you do something. Action. And that's what we want. We're taught to want that. And so the Eastern mode of being receptive is kind of whatever. It's really not respected. And yet we have all these societal ills that now I'm on my little soapbox. Oh my God, just shove me off anytime. Okay. But get the cane. But people are desperate to be received. People know that they're not being heard. They're not being seen. And so we get all these dysfunctionalities, people just being very, very unhappy. And you see it a lot in kids these days. When someone is ignored, that's the worst thing. They'd rather act out and do negative. They'd rather get negative attention than no attention. And we crave yin. We need to be seen. We need to be received. And it's a vital life thing. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but being more open to the crucial role of yin is a starting point to that, I think the evolution that we need to be doing.
I really thank you for those last remarks, especially because the two halves of the picture. I wondered first, have you ever presented anything like this to psychiatry or to psychiatry programs in neural behavior, where this model is the model, that there isn't one or the other, there are both, and they're operating in tandem, that there are something like, I can't remember, it's 14 billion or 114 billion neurons in the corpus callosum, etc. But it depicts the problem that psychiatry has had and psychology for a long time. It is pitting Pavlov and who's the behaviorist?
Skinner?
No, the first guy.
Skinner, B.F. Skinner?
Well, anyways,
Behaviorist, yeah.
okay. It
Yeah.
pits Pavlov and the behaviorists
Yeah.
and the cognitive neurotherapists against Freud and the psychodynamic psychologists. Freud is right in his basic conceptualizing of how people behave, and wrong about a lot of other stuff. And so it has a home. Your yin yang has a home in psychiatry now, in study. And I wondered if you have any. I'm sure you would have no trouble making that discussion relevant to psychiatry as well. But there's a dichotomy, a wall between Pavlov and Freud, between Pavlov and all the other, the cognitive, not the cognitive, but the people trying to understand the complexities of behavior that are not explained by why does the dog salivate when a person comes into the.
Well, thank you for that. I actually haven't. I mean, I gave a talk a while ago on health that was related to health more generally, but that's an interesting point. That I mean, it's kind of this whole issue of the overemphasis on yang and the neglect of yin. It permeates science. And there's an example where an anthropologist, Emily Martin, as recently as the 1990s, observed that in reproductive biology, there was a mythology in place of science about the sperm and the egg, and she wrote a whole article about kind of exposing this, about all the metaphors that are used with the valiant knight going to save the damsel and all this, and going to the rescue of the passive egg, and in fact. And no one ever bothered to actually do the science. And then when she wrote that, it opened up new experimentation goals in that field. And they started, I'm going to look and see what's actually going on here now. And they actually did some science, and they found out that the egg was active, that it was sending out chemical signals, that it was guiding the sperm. They used to say sperm is, they're great swimmers, or they're doing butterfly. They're so amazing, And I'm like, no, they need help.
Yeah.
And so it's a partnership. And the egg creates this fertilization cone, so that when one sperm gets in, it actually creates a barrier, so the other ones don't, and it engulfs. It's doing active things, but that's yin, and it was assumed that never happens. It's just not something you can even think about. Yeah.
What is your explanation for why natural selection produced such an amazingly peculiarly structured brain?
Oh, gee, that really goes way beyond my area of expertise. I'm not a biologist at all. So, yeah, I wouldn't be competent to really address that. But again, in a purely mechanistic account, I mean, your question raises raises that issue of design and teleology, and this is where quantum possibilities could be relevant, and this is where there are issues of free will and intent that can't be addressed by Western science the way it's currently formulated, and including yin and this idea that reality has this domain of potentiality that's really there and perhaps accessible to life forms in some way that I don't pretend to understand, could at least provide an opening for making more sense of that.
Okay, thank you very much, Ruth.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.